Okay, what's up, everybody? It's me, Ray, fully clothed, talking about Ray, who's half naked, as you can see on the screen. Kind of a big one today. We're looking at mostly ATG split squats and their variations. ATG in this context stands for to grass split squat, and I think it's a great intro exercise for people who haven't done a ton of resistance training before to develop mobility in the squat and strength at the same time. So you can see here, I'm just kind of showing you some regressions. The first one is going to be just an elevated front foot. I'd say my front foot is elevated maybe 20 or 24 inches off the ground. I'm just using a chair. I figured it'd be easier for people doing this at home to not maybe have a plyometric box or something, but a chair works just fine. And as you can see now, I have lowered my front foot down onto a stack of books, which is maybe 10 inches off the ground. That's a pretty big jump. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that yourself. Try to go a little bit more incrementally as far as lowering your front foot, which will steadily increase the stretch and the resistance on the working leg, the front leg. And I love this exercise because it targets the VMO specifically, VMO being the vastus medialis, which is one of the muscles in the quadricep, which is like the front of the leg, right? With the highest amount of fast twitch muscles, which kind of for the layman just means that it fires earlier than the rest of your quad in any kind of like movement, whether it's walking, running, or jumping, swimming, even. Your VMO is going to fire first. So that's one of the reasons why it's a pretty important muscle in protecting your knee because it is so close to the knee, and it also is kind of like the first line of defense against the forces of gravity coming to just like smash on your cartilage and your muscles. So I think this is a great intro exercise for the legs. I think it works actually really well as a body weight exercise because it is a one-legged exercise, so therefore you get more resistance than you would do by just going and doing like body weight squats, like double leg body weight squats, even though those are great too. And I also think this is great because the exercise is split into two sides of the body, right? So you can really like hone in on any kind of imbalances you might have, like if your left side's a lot tighter than your right side, and kind of work those accordingly, whether it's doing a couple extra reps on your like tighter or weaker side. And trust me, like almost everyone is going to have a difference in the sides. It'd be really remarkable if someone didn't. We're right-handed, left-handed people. It's how the majority of human beings tend to develop, and they kind of choose a side of their body to use more, a side that's more skillful and more strong. So keep that in mind when you're doing this, and try not to get discouraged, from those discrepancies. Like that's, again, like super natural and super normal. So a couple form cues that I should probably get into before we get done with this footage is I like to think of three of them, and we'll go from the top down. I like to think of keeping my spine pretty much straight up and down, vertical as possible. And in doing that, I also think about keeping the pelvis up and down, almost like the pelvis is a big bowl in your belly and it's like filled with gumballs or something that you don't want to spill out. Beyond that, I try to make sure that in the front leg that my gastrocnemius, which is my top of my calf, and my hamstring muscle are coming into contact with each other. As you can see here, there shouldn't really be any light in between those. And the third cue I think of is trying to keep my rear leg off the ground, which is to say not letting the knee touch. I think in the first rep of the third progression of this, where there's no books that I'm using, you can see I let the knee touch the ground. Don't do that. I left it in so you could see it and see how like easy it is to just make that subtle change. But keeping that knee off the ground is gonna engage your hip flexor in your rear leg in an active stretch position. And oftentimes that in and of itself is like a great kind of bonus workout that you're getting from this, quadriceps exercise, an exercise that's really more focused on the front of your leg. You just more bang for your buck. You happen to be stretching and also strengthening your hip flexor, which for a lot of people, especially if you work like an office job, any kind of sitting job, or even myself, I stand all day and work in a kitchen, but I have issues with tightness in my hip flexors and anterior pelvic tilt, which is the tilting of the pelvis forward. which ultimately leads to, can lead to lower back pain, knee pain, sciatic nerve pain. So it's a great thing to be mindful of and a great thing to work out in your exercise. Kind of a forgotten little muscle and a great nook and cranny to like get in there and dust off all the cobwebs and see what's going on in those hip flexors. So the next is kind of a not necessarily a regression, but more of like a specification, and it's we're going to be calling it a Poliquin step up today. There's a few variations of this exercise, all credited to different strength coaches. But this one I think is most akin to Charles Poliquin's method of doing a VMO step up, I guess, which again is the vastus medialis, the teardrop shaped muscle next to your knee and your front of your leg. And this is a great exercise because it just really isolates the knee going over the toe in a short range of motion. So if you're experiencing any knee pain or discomfort, a lot of the times this can be the simplest exercise that you're going to be able to do, which is phenomenal because it does a ton to stimulate that VMO, which will ultimately in turn over time strengthen and help to protect your knee muscle and your knee joint by using that muscle and protect the ligaments and tendons around there. It will also create some length in the knee, but the split squat is really going to be what's going to lengthen those muscles and tendons for you. However, this will definitely stimulate the blood flow through that joint and therefore stimulate the synovial fluid that surrounds and protects the joints, which oftentimes in people with bad knees doesn't happen a lot because they try to avoid, moving through their knees. So I think this is a great simple progression. A few form cues for this. Start lower elevated. The farther you have to send your front leg down, the harder the exercise is going to be. I always really think about rolling kind of from my heel when I'm in the top position, and then I roll my foot forward onto the ball of my foot, and then back. And the whole time I'm doing it, I try to keep my upper body relatively straight up and down and relatively neutral, and really let that knee track over the foot. As you're doing the exercise, which is to say as you're going down and kind of lengthening through the front of your leg in this exercise. That's going to help just get the most stimulation in that quadricep muscle, which is what we're looking for in this one. And lastly is just an example of a banded reverse squat. This is ideally done on a cable machine, but a lot of us don't have those. So here I'm doing it with a resistance band just for accessibility. A couple things. You want to try to make sure there's tension on your feet in the relaxed position. You can actually see me adjusting and pulling back in the video while I'm filming. And you also want to have an arch in your back. You want to kind of feel your tailbone pressing into the ground and your lower back kind of arched off. That'll help stimulate your hip flexors rather than just your abdominals, although you'll definitely get an abdominal stimulation here too. And I think that's about it. If you liked what you saw, subscribe and stop by for more stuff. Bye guys, see you soon.